All right, so what is anthropology? We did this a little bit before, but now we're doing it formally from the textbook with real quotes. So, our authors tell us that anthropology is the study of what it means to be human in the broadest possible sense. In the next part of the chapter, we'll read how it embraces both scientific forms and also humanistic forms. So we like to think of ourselves, in order to study human beings, you need to span all the disciplines, you might say. And so it also says that it studies what it means to be human in all places and times. And we brought up this question a little bit when we were reading about those strange people called the Nakirema and who gets to count in the human family, that although it is in some ways deceptively easy or simple that we believe we know humans when we see one, the question of who is a human is actually in some cases up for debate, especially when it comes to those fossils that we're going to be reading about and those creatures we encounter in human evolution. In other words, how far back does this human thing go? How do you know when you dig up a fossil or examine ancient DNA that that is a member of the human condition? And just to give us a primer on how human evolution works in terms of how long ago things are, we'll be going into this in more detail. But for now, I want to just give you a sense of the big picture about how this works. So we call upright walking primates, bipedal primates, we call those hominins. And we see those appear in the, or we think we see them appear in the fossil record. Things get murky at 6 to 8 million years ago, at the time of what is called the most recent common ancestor. And just to give you a little tip on evolution, we aren't looking for missing links anymore because that is an outdated concept. What we look for are common ancestors to the species that are here among us today. And so when we say most recent common ancestor, we're talking about a creature that gave way or derived from, or from which proceeded eventually humans and chimpanzees that we know today and bonobos. And so this most recent common ancestor from which we all came from was probably around about 6 to 8 million years ago. And the first separation of what the creatures that would be on the hominin line instead of the ape line is this adoption of a upright bipedal walking. Now, should we call those hominins humans? I don't know. They'd be pretty strange to us. I'm not sure I want to go back that far. In the last class, I mentioned Lucy, which I got caught off guard by, and I forgot how long ago Lucy was. The actual Australopiths show up in the fossil record, and on these we have lots of specimens at about 2 to 3 million years ago. So let's say 2.5 million years ago. Now, the Australopiths, one of the reasons Lucy is such a famous specimen is because they were very securely bipedal in the sense that they had ape-like crania or ape-like brain size, but they were habitual bipedal walkers. And so they seem in some cases to also be using tools, walking along, but they're pretty short. So are we going to include them in the human family? I don't know. I'm getting more comfortable with them, but it's hard to say. Around 2 million years ago, you see what is called Homo erectus, which are bipedal, and some of these were tall, almost 6 feet tall. We probably wouldn't get mistaken. We wouldn't be confused if we saw one. We probably would know that they were different from us. But it's getting pretty close to some of the things that humans do. Probably used fire and cooked, or started to do that, spread out in different places. At about 100,000 years ago, there were a number of bipedal, fairly large-brained creatures walking around, some of whom interbreeded, now we know, with Homo sapiens at the time. The Denisovans we know mostly genetically, the Neanderthals are more famous. And so if you were a Homo sapien, who had also emerged at the time, from 100,000 years ago, you would actually be encountering a fairly diverse range of bipedal large-brained creatures that you might sometimes be interacting with, which is bizarre to think about. I'm pretty comfortable thinking that they might be part of the human family because most of us have a little bit of their DNA still with us today. So something happened there that made us part of the same interbreeding species. Now, in today's world, Homo sapiens are the only surviving species of hominids, as our textbook tells us, which is to say all the other species have gone away for various reasons, probably at about 30 to 40,000 years ago for the last of the Neanderthals. And so we are the only species of upright walking primates that survive. And so it is actually an interesting question where you're going to draw the line around human beings. Anthropologists do insist, though, that all of us Homo sapiens are human beings. And we need to be careful about those who want to use pejorative words about other people who are people just like us. So for the last 100,000 years, certainly 40,000 years, we have been one single interbreeding species. There are no other species. There are no reproductively isolated Homo sapiens somewhere who can't interbreed with all of us. Whenever Homo sapiens get together, they try out the interbreeding thing. And so here we are, all human beings together, but some of our closer cousins have gone away. So, anthropology studies the people who are human in the broadest possible sense. And I'm dwelling on this because, in fact, anthropology emerged as an academic discipline about 150 years ago, at a time when the world was arranged in a very racist hierarchy in which certain people believed that they were on top of the world and they were the civilized people, and that other people shouldn't even be considered people. And so anthropology was born in a European and North American context in which some people believed they were studying people who were inferior to them. Now, eventually, anthropology would say, no, this is not true, that all people are equally human. But it took a while, and it emerges out of this context in which people have judged other people and put them into this subhuman or non-human category. We have to be very careful of that whenever we're thinking about, talking about, interacting with other people, even though they may seem strange at first. Now, your textbook has a very nice diagram in it, which talks about the 4 subfields of anthropology: biological anthropology, archaeology, cultural anthropology, linguistic anthropology. We'll be going through each of these in turn, but it has this nice little overlapping diagram there so that you study what does it mean to be human, but there's also this subdivision of discipline. It says on page 4, at the bottom of page 4. So, biological anthropology. As we mentioned, one of the first things we're going to be studying, one of its concerns is the study of human evolution. But it also concerns what is the diversity of the past, or how people varied in the past, and how people vary in the present, or what we might be able to find from their bones and looking at them and different ways. Biological anthropology also includes what we call primatology, or the study of non-human primates. Why do we say non-human primates? Yes, we are classified in the primate family. We'll learn about this a little bit by Linnaeus. Classified us in the primate family a long time ago. He's the guy who came up with that genus species thing that you have to learn. That's his fault. And it's also his fault that we're in this primate family. And so when we talk about non-human primates, we're talking about primates other than our own our own family of primates. So we are primates, by the way. Linnaeus lived and died before the idea of evolution came out. So he was a creationist. He believed he was classifying nature by God's order, and he put us in there. So this isn't some Darwinian trick. This is just Linnaeus saying, those chimpanzees and orangutans are pretty similar to us. We're primates too. Yay. Great quote from Biological Anthropology. For those of you who want to be into science, it is the most explicitly scientific. For those of you who are scared of science, then you can come over with me into cultural anthropology. So biological anthropologists are the most likely to do genetics, be looking at skeletons and stuff like that and testing them, testing hypotheses about the origins, patterns, and implications of past and present human biological diversity. So yes, this is archaeology, which is the study of the human past. And we basically are looking for things that have been left behind, the material remains of what has been left behind in the past. In some ways, you might be studying what people left as garbage, but at least it's there in the sense that it is an artifact. It's something that somebody has made or used in the past. So the artifacts and these material remains compose what we call the archaeological record. When we talk about the archaeological record, it means the physical evidence that we have of human activity from the past. Things that you can't deny because there they are, the stuff that people have left behind, their artifacts. But this includes things like excavating structures or the remains of structures, foundations, as well as the remains of animals and plants. So sometimes there's a biological aspect to this because you're looking for the animal and plant remains as well. So that is archaeology. Our third subfield is cultural anthropology. It's actually the largest subfield. Most people know anthropology from the bones and the stones part of thing, the archaeology and the biological anthropology. But as a subdiscipline, the people who are the largest group within anthropology are cultural anthropologists. Our textbook says this is how people share, change, and dispute culture within a society. It's a big question about what exactly culture is. It basically means things we learn or learned behavior. It involves the use of norms and symbols. For norms, it is a shared belief of what is acceptable to do in a society. Now, again, those are sometimes also disputed because we might have a norm, but certain people don't want to follow the norm or want to change the norm. But they're a shared idea of what is right or acceptable to do. And then we have a symbol. Now, symbols are super important to us. They define them as an abstract representation of something else in the shared context of a culture. But maybe a couple examples will help. Traditionally, if you're wearing a metal band on the fourth finger of your left hand in this country, it means you're married, right? Now, why should that be? There's no reason for it in nature. It's not like somebody biologically told us if we put a metal band around this finger, that means you're married to the other primate. It's just we all agree that that's what it's supposed to mean, and we go through this ritual and we put these on each other's finger. It's interesting to me because when I was first doing my fieldwork in Colombia, South America, at least among certain people of that region of the world, they wore their wedding bands on their right fourth finger. So at the time, my fingers were smaller than they are now. So that's what I did too, because it fit better there. And for many years, I did that because that's what they did in my field site in Colombia. But when I was back in this country, hanging around in certain places in, say, New York, and I was told that actually at the time, and I'm not sure this is still true anymore, it's been a while, but if you were a guy wearing a ring around your right finger, it meant that you were in a same-sex long-term relationship or same-sex marriage. Now my fingers are bigger, so I'll just do it the traditional way. I always like to do it to mess people up, but now we'll just go back to the regular symbolization. So symbols are these things that there's no reason for them to mean that. They just do. And so symbols are a part of this strange thing where they have to be learned. We have to learn to recognize them, but they become so natural to us. We swim in worlds of symbols that we're just doing it without even thinking about it, but they are rooted in learned behavior. And so cultural anthropology takes us into that context of learned behavior. In chapter 2, we'll talk more about what they call doing cultural anthropology, or doing an ethnography, which basically means going into another society or a different part of your own society, learning about the people there, immersing yourself, and somehow communicating about them or writing about them. And so when you're doing cultural anthropology, you as a person, as a researcher, you go into a society and you immerse yourself there, and you become the instrument of data collection and analysis. Now, this is sometimes a little bit more difficult to communicate to people because then you have to talk to people, try to understand where people are coming from in a process that we call participant observation. So you're observing people, but you are also participating in their lives. So you find out things about how they might use symbols and symbolic activity and why they might wear wedding bands on their right finger instead of their left, what that means about their society or their subculture within the United States, you might say. So in the next section, we'll read about, this is also called fieldwork in anthropology, and it's one of the reasons that many people are drawn to anthropology as a discipline. So some people are drawn to the bones, and some people are drawn to the stones and digging things up, and some people are drawn to being able to go into other societies and to talk to people and immerse yourself in their lives. The fourth subfield of anthropology is also the smallest subfield of anthropology, called linguistic anthropology, which is the study of human language in a social context. Now, language is a very particular symbolic system. It's almost completely symbolic, which is to say there is no necessary reason why the words that we speak correspond to different objects or meanings. And so it's a very complicated system that we all learn one or more languages, and it really distinguishes human beings because we are able to transmit, share and transmit ideas by the means of human symbolic language. And so this is also one of the more complex subfields of anthropology, and maybe that's why there are fewer people in it. It's a smaller part, but it is a pretty amazing study. Our textbook gives us the example of Dr. Jonathan Rosa doing a study of high school students. I think this picture is taken from California, but he's also studied in Illinois and their language practices. And Dr. Rosa is one of our coolest anthropologists. Here he is. You can barely tell that he's an anthropologist. He's fitting in so well. So he's a really interesting person, and he's also a person who has used linguistic anthropology as a means of not just talking about the theoretical ideas, but what it means in our society. So he's someone that I like to follow on social media because he comes up with some great statements or great ideas. This was one of his posts from a little bit ago that I've always liked. Being a linguistic anthropologist is fun because I regularly get to remind people that the only difference between forms of ask and forms of difference is racism in general and anti-Blackness in particular. And yes, this is called metathesis, which is a technical term. We will later in this class study how various forms of saying the word that is spelled ASK in English, that 500 years ago around London, there were several different ways to say this word. Some of them got associated with different types of English, but at that time there were all kinds of different ways to say this word, and there was no way that was necessarily considered correct. For those of you who might have been so-called corrected for saying this word in a different way, that is usually, it is just a linguistic variety. And the fact that we consider one variety to be correct when there are actually multiple varieties within English in the past is just racism. Or as he put it with some co-authors, language is not the problem, racism is the problem. Students of color are always being told that they need to change the way they speak. But what if instead educators change the way they listen? So one of the points he makes is that if you're a white guy who speaks two languages, you're praised as being bilingual and being so culturally sensitive. But if you're a person of color who might speak two languages, you often get criticized for not speaking English, not knowing the English language. So he asks, well, hey, what if educators changed how we listen? Bless them. Hope it works out. That was October 18th, 2024, when that idea came out. We seem to be moving in an opposite direction.